Hello, welcome to the meeting tent, an ongoing series on the work of Stan Tenen. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our usual cast of characters, Michael Andron, Lavana Tenen, and Daniel Gill. Unfortunately, Adele couldn't make it this episode. So today we're going to delve into a little deeper into the articles that were written over the years that are available on the website, meru.org. Today we're going to look into an article that Stan wrote in 2006. It was again a example of how his theories go beyond a two-dimensional poster and into the three-dimensional world and the world of reality. In this case, the world of the honeybee. So let's go ahead and put the web page up. So here we are at meru.org, and I'm going to click on Newsletter Archive, and we're going to scroll down to number 34. Number 34 is right here. And there's a little introduction here, and as you can see, the article is called Deborah the Beekeeper. Let's see if I can make it bigger. And we'll go through and talk about how Stan came about this, but let's go ahead and Lavana, if you wouldn't mind just reading the beginning, starting under the title and up to the part where he starts talking about the words, just the introduction here, and then we'll
Okay,
do that.
sure. Okay. The name of the article is Deborah the Bee Speaker. I have something really elegant, beautiful, and in its small way quite spectacular to report. I came upon this reference in the May-June 2006 issue of American Scientist, Sigma Psi Science Honor Society magazine, in an article titled Group Decision Making in Honeybee Swarms by Seeley, Vischer, and Pacino. American Scientist subscription information is available at americanscientist.org. Look at the poster on the last page of this essay. Good, you've got that up here. The graphic at the upper left, adapted from figure 3 from the article in American Scientist, shows how a honeybee communicates the location of flowers with nectar to other honeybees. The bee makes a so-called waggle dance in order to point to the direction of the food and provide a measure of its distance. As the poster shows, what the honeybee scout does is exactly what I'm proposing for the Hebrew alphabet, except in 2D instead of 3D. The graphic of the waggle dance is just a two-lobed version of the torus knot with the central waggling column. This central column is where our thumb goes in the tefillin hand model. It is our pointer, and it is the bee's pointer. Here we have an example from a very simple part of the animal kingdom of the use of exactly the same sort of gesture language we're proposing for the Hebrew letter gestures, based on exactly the same elements: the sun, a tree, and flowers. For us, of course, the sun is the source of our mind. The tree is our spinal column, and the flowers are pointed to by, and thus are in, our hands. The bees use the same model as we use, but the bee doesn't have intelligence like ours. Thus, the model must be intrinsic, even to small creatures like bees.
All right, this is from a YouTube video. The source is called Native Lang, and this gives an example of what Stan is talking about, an animated example. So you can see watch the movement here, and notice and he'll show it again with a. That's exactly the same movement that Stan's describing in that poster. Here's another. Get through this site called Flow Hive. Now watch the movement of this center bees. You can see how they're moving in that same direction.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Stan didn't make this up. And it's amazing that he found it. Now, he didn't have access to YouTube when he wrote this. So he was just going by an article that he found. Any background on this at all, Lavana, or is just another example of Stan reading an article and just showing?
I think it was an example of everything coming together at once. He was always intrigued by the next portion of the article, which we didn't quite get to.
We'll get to that.
Which is the fact that the word for word and the word for bee in Hebrew is basically, it's the same word. And, you know, it was a head scratcher as to, you know, why? You know, given that these kinds of things in Hebrew are not coincidences, if you look deeply enough, that was something that he always it just intrigued him, and he had it in the area of his mind where he stored really interesting anomalies that I can't explain. And you know, and then we had a subscription to American Scientist, and here was this article. It's like all of a sudden, oh, wow, look at that. And so he spent about, he spent about 6 months looking through the actual research on bees, exploring the word, you know, the Hebrew word for, you know, for word, for speak rather. And actually, at a certain point, he was thinking of a little children's story that would be based on, you know, a couple of kids lost in the forest and they needed to find their way home, and a little bee came and taught them how to ask or find it. Nothing ever really happened with that, but it was a sweet idea. So that's, I think, what the bottom line that one can say about this is that it points to the idea of this kind of motion and shape as being what in other places he called the shape of information. How something that shows up, certainly mathematically, in various different dimensions, as we've shown. And so that is the, and the fact that it's intrinsic, that, as he said in the last paragraph, you know, the bee doesn't have intelligence like ours, thus the model must be intrinsic even to small creatures like bees. That this is a way to communicate, and the effort to communicate can involve something that so closely replicates the toroidal model that we were using. So that
there's one other element to this. You might have written this. We didn't go to the introduction of this before the article, which
yeah.
is also an interesting little tidbit if you want to go ahead and read that.
Sure. Here is a quote from Yehuda HaLevi, a 12th century Spanish rabbi, philosopher, and sage. And here's the quote, which this is from Al-Khuzari, chapter 4, lesson 25. And it was translated for us by our friend Daniel Gill. As it is said in the Torah, and whatever Adam called each living thing, that remained its name forever. Genesis 2:19. That is to say, that the animal was right and befitting to its given name, and that its given name was harmonious with the behavior of the animal and its applied nature. If each Hebrew letter has an intrinsic natural meaning, then Yehuda HaLevi's words are more than just a good story. We have shared many explorations of Hebrew words in past issues of eTaurus, which you can find on our website. Here, Stan reports on an extraordinary new finding that connects a primary Hebrew word root, real word observations of nature, and one of the most important geometric forms in our research.
So, Daniel, when you were asked to translate that, did you know that it was in relationship to this article, or?
That's a good question. That was a while ago. I don't know if it was. I think it might have been related to the idea. That happened a lot. I would find something that Stan was thinking about, or that related to something that he was about to be thinking about, and there was this neat kind of synergy that happened between us. I just would always find these quotes in my general study travels, and so I don't remember whether it was before or after, but certainly right around that time, and obviously it was before the article was published. It's still amazing. It's actually a really good translation, and I think sometimes people, when translating old texts, get bogged down in the details of it and lose the gestalt of it. Like it's more important when you translate, because you're never going to get it translated right, ever. You're just not. So you might as well just make a commentary of a translation immediately, because that's what you're doing anyway. So now the commentary obviously should be based in the technical specifications of the language, but it's still just your commentary. But I think I captured the essence of what he's saying there, meaning there's an equivalence between the name in Hebrew and the animal's nature, and they're kind of synonymous with one another. That seems to be what he's saying, that or one is, they're generative of each other or linked somehow. He's probably hinting to much more than he's actually saying there, considering he was a Makubal and quite illustrious thinker. But yeah, it's interesting. It's amazing. This is amazing. I mean, this is like the prototypical, example. I mean, Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi would have just done a little dance at least. I mean, if he'd seen Stan's article, I mean, it's like unbelievable,
We actually did a lot from that particular section, the chapter 4, lesson 25 of Al-Khuzari, because there is another phrase in there which basically says that, and I'm going to be paraphrasing it probably terribly, but that the letters came from a device which was in accordance with the meaning of each letter. And we discussed that passage when we were talking about the word inyan in another video. But there is, that particular chapter of Al-Khuzari is very rich with meaningful ideas about the nature of Hebrew, the nature of the alphabet, and how it's related to creation in the first place. We got a whole lot of fruitful connections with fully accepted traditional material, connections with ideas that Stan had come up with independently. It was a really wonderful collaboration, and Daniel is right. I also remember that very often the two of them, Daniel and Stan, would wind up thinking about the same things at the same time, and they would call each other. And you used to come over to our house, and we would sit there and discuss materials.
Oh yeah.
Often.
Oh yeah, it was great times.
Yeah,
it was great. I often caught you or Stan or both of you feeding the wild animals in the backyard. And
Yeah.
you were away one time, and I had to. These were not domesticated. These were just, you cared for these animals, and they came to rely on you. So I came over and fed the turkeys and fed. It was quite interesting to watch, because they really, you really were taking care of them. So
Yeah. And
but,
just the idea of, I mean, we lived, when we lived in the same town that Daniel lived in, our house backed up onto an Audubon nature preserve. And so we lived there for almost 18 years. So we had a real wonderful opportunity to watch these animals in their native habitat, to see their behavior, and to realize that, for example, turkeys, which are a very, very old species, have a very robust communal entity. I mean, they live in families. They have communal behaviors. They, you know, and also to have the really awesome sense that yes, they're doing these things. They're clearly organized around something, and I have no idea what. It's really kind of puts us as humans. It kind of puts us in our place.
Yeah, and there's another article on the site called Flocking and Swarming. And it includes the turkeys, how they take flight in a similar pattern. And there's an illustration of that. It's actually in the book also.
Yes.
There's an example of how the turkeys, do that same pattern. So is just side, is Al-Khuzari not translated in English?
Oh, it is, yeah.
Oh, okay, but you were translating it for them.
Yeah, it was there's a public domain translation which is really antiquated, but you can find it on the internet. But it is a great exhibit for what Daniel was talking about, in that, particularly now, got almost 100 years later, I think, from when that translation was made, our use of language and our understanding of concepts has evolved greatly. And I don't know of any modern public domain translation, but you can find the older translation on the internet quite easily.
It might be in Safaria. I wonder if they translated it.
Good idea.
Yeah, it's a good idea to check. We also, my rock band, Raybard, we did a song called Ofra, which is by Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi, which is a really, really strange love song. He wrote really interesting poetry.
He was a very interesting personality.
He certainly would have danced to that.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, if you Google Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi Ofra, we're like the third or fourth hit that comes up, which is wild. Yeah, it's a good song.
So those of you who are biblical advocates and study can check out Genesis 2:19, and it's just a line about how Adam was able to, and you look at it on face value, he says, well, how is one person able to name animals? But now we're looking into a deeper process here.
And also, I just wanted to interject, Daniel mentioned a site called Safaria. It's safaria.org, S like Sam, E-F like Frank, ARIA.org, where you can find a great deal of traditional Jewish learning material. Some of it is only in Hebrew, but a lot of it is in English, and then there are pages of people's own commentary and work on it. So if you're into that and you don't yet know about Safaria, do explore it, because there's just a lot to it.
Yeah, and it keeps growing. I mean, because there are contributors who they do it because they want to do it. The really great scholars have put their work on there of translations of really important books from the rabbinic literature. That's, and it's organized really well. You can go by chapter and verse and see what's been written on it, and a lot of that stuff's translated. translated. So
All right. Let's go down to the next part of this article. And now we're getting more into not just the fact of the dance itself, but the word. And so let's put that up on the screen. All right. So we want to let's start with "and there's more." So Lavana, go ahead and I'll put the poster back up as you're reading.
Sure. And there's more. Our theory requires that the idiomatic meanings of Hebrew words derives in some reasonable way from the functional meaning of the word as spelled out by reading it as an acronym, letter by letter. The root word for honeybee in Hebrew is based on the letters DBR. That's Dalet Beit Resh. It's a common name, Deborah or Deborah. The D, Dalet, refers to dividing something. The B, the Beit, literally means in or with, and the R, the Resh, literally means head, headwater, or heading. So the Hebrew word meaning something like a piece of, a small division of, in a heading. In other words, picking a direction. If you think about that for a second and picture it in your mind, you'll see what he was talking about. Hebrew names for creatures and other things are based on their function, and this fits perfectly. For example, the letters that spell the Hebrew word horse literally mean to sustain and carry. So, a honeybee is Dalet Beit Resh, DBR, and he wrote that in May 2006.
Okay. Again, Stan was looking for real life examples of his ideas. It was important for him to be able to do that, to get it off the printed page, basically, and put it in real life situations. So here he's taking different elements. He's taking the quote by HaLevi. He's taking the breakdown of the letters, and he's combining it with other ideas that he had, the shape of information, and putting it together to show the depth of his research. That
And I think one of the points that he was constantly looking to demonstrate was that these shapes, these relationships, that there's an intrinsic quality. They're part of the reality that we live in, and they can be found. And also that those people that we think of as having lived in more primitive eras were extremely competent observers of nature and users of natural qualities of things, and that their observations are worth paying attention to, which is something that we in the modern world have we get kind of arrogant about this and assume that that people who lived millennia ago really weren't as smart as we are, and that is simply not the case. The only difference is that their tools were different than ours. They had different expertises, and their technologies, such as they were different, but their capacity for observation and their wisdom about it, is something we should pay attention to.
That's a really good point. I mean, you think back and, person who is born with intellect back then and has the desire, curiosity to observe and make assumptions, and all they had was the natural world, and it was like an encyclopedia. You go through your whole life and it'll be never ending. So no matter where you are, and it's why the great sages, even of the 18th century, like Rabbi Nachman or the Baal Shem Tov, spent so much time in nature, communing. They disappear for days or weeks, and come back with, an enlightenment. So it's arrogant of us to live in this world and think that technology is it's all there is. And there was intelligence, and Stan was trying to make that bridge between those two worlds, physics and consciousness, and physics in the natural world.
Mhm. Exactly. And he made a great deal of progress on that, which we haven't really been focused on in these videos, and which sadly, at least at the moment, that area of the research is kind of on hold, basically because at the moment we don't have people with that kind of mind, that kind of expertise, who are curious enough, who basically want to work with the material. So that's something that I hope will happen someday. That someone with a both creative and scientific mind, is someone who is a holist and a generalist, who looks and can see, as Stanley did, the when processes across many different fields of observation are actually congruent, um, will encounter our work and want to know more and want to take it up, from where Stanley had to leave it. That's just a thought that I have.
I mean, it's an interesting thing in that I think Stan was kind of a time traveler in a certain way.
Right.
I mean, he's going back, the 12th, or it was like the 13th century. Kabbalistic ideas connect very much with what he's talking about, and he's reaching back, way back there. But at the same time, it's interesting because he was also he was very much reaching forward. So it's just an interesting thing that maybe there's something to that the more one reaches outside of time, it has to, by definition, go in both directions. And it's a curious thing because there's one of the laws of the Sabbath of Shabbat is you're not really allowed to travel so much. You have to stay within a very small area, basically, geographically. And one of the things I heard someone say once was that part of the reason is that you on Shabbat, you don't want to limit yourself to the small amount you can travel physically. And I think Stan was a wonderful example of someone who really, he kept Shabbat, and that limitation of him sitting in himself, not only on Shabbat, but maybe specifically on Shabbat, probably allowed him, especially with such an expansive mind, to just travel far, far beyond, how far you could walk or drive or even fly,
I'm sure that many scholarly rabbis would say, well, you travel in the Torah. That gives you the source of time travel. And
Yeah.
Stan talked about time travel a few times. He was kind of cryptic about it, without being too literal, but he saw something to that. And I'll tell you something, he lived it. We drove from LA to San Francisco, and it was like being in a time machine. It went so fast. Well, he drove fast, but still, it just seemed like, whoa, we were just in LA, now we're in San Francisco. But
Something else he used to do was what he always had a thing about being on time, and sometimes he would cover the clock in the car so that he wouldn't know what the time was, and we would get there on time.
Wow. Huh.
Typical.
Very interesting.
Amazing.
But this whole concepts again of naming and the alphabet and the words, again, it's so difficult for our minds to comprehend the depth of this alphabet. Obviously you wrote a whole book about it, that changed the world. And the idea of letters having this deeper meaning is a difficult concept for us to take on, because we just see it as language in a two-dimensional form. And I think that's been kind of what we've been trying to do here in the series, is to show how Stan saw this alphabet in much, much deeper ways and showed so many examples. And this today is um, another way of looking at that, these specific letters and their deeper meanings of how it all ties together. Michael, do you have any comments on or thoughts on this?
There's lots of stories in Hasidic sources about the Baal Shem Tov and others who they say spoke the language of the animals. And what thought arose as I was listening to all of this is that that doesn't mean that you can buzz or make sounds like a chimp or a dolphin, but knowing the language of the animals is also observing what they do and communicating in a pre-spoken fashion. It didn't have to be, there was a time where we didn't have languages, and no doubt the cave people and their grunting and their gestures were in fact their language, and they communicated on some level, and survived. And it seems like to say that, what does it mean that the Baal Shem Tov knew the language of the animals? Was that, the joke was when we were kids in yeshiva and we were told that we'd read that sentence about Adam naming the animals. Well, how did he know what to name it? And the rabbi would invariably say, well, he looked at a horse and he said, that looks just like a horse. And thereby it was named a horse, or a Seuss. Maybe Dr. Seuss spoke the language also. He certainly had his own way of communicating. But it's a remarkable thing that we're surrounded by nature, but we don't really listen to it. There was a meditative exercise that we often did in the martial arts as part of our rooting, becoming grounded. And what do we call the people who are trying to save the planet? Tree huggers. They would go and they would just put their hands and feel the energy of the tree. Could you feel the sap moving through the interior of the tree? There are just so many different ways that you can come at this idea. It's a remarkable thing when we try and fathom it in some way. Just doing it from Hebrew letters to the animals can leave you for quite some time speculating how that word became the word for a monkey or a sheep or whatever it was, wherever in the world it was.
Yeah, and we do know that there are certain letters that do equate with certain animals, like monkey,
the letter kuf. Yeah.
So again, this is all about research, and what Levana's bringing forth is that it needs to continue. There is an element, and I'm hesitant to talk about it because I might get things thrown at me, but we are moving into another phase of information gathering, as you know. Many people are put off by it, but it's here, it's coming. We can't deny it. And it may be a way of forging these two elements of nature, of the natural world, and some of these ideas that Stan had in physics. And I'm talking about AI. It's something that if we get a hold of, if we can get ahead of it, then we can show there are positive aspects of this. We know that there are negative elements. Everybody knows it. Everybody's talking about it. But if the technology's here and we can harness it into, we've even talked about perhaps coming up with a way of getting Stan back to somebody had come up with a chat bot of Stan actually presenting this stuff as a bot, but let's take it a step further in terms of forging this information, um, this natural world information. And if somebody took this research on the honeybee, for example, and kind of forged it with some of these ideas in physics and movement, who knows? I mean, it's a because I don't know, Lavana, if there are people who are going to step forward or they're available to do this, and if they are, we'd love to talk to them. But it doesn't seem to be forthcoming unless we can get this word out on a greater scale. Anyway, just something I'm throwing out here. We do have a member of our team who's very interested in pursuing this, Tad. Something to think about. Put it on our list of many tasks that need to occur. Okay, well, I think I wasn't sure how far we could go with this discussion today, and it turned out to be pretty productive. So I'm really happy about that. Thanks for watching, and we'll carry on with this as we go forward. Yes, Michael.
No, I'm just waving goodbye.
Lavana?
Yeah, no, same thing.
Oh, okay, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care.